we would like to discuss human trafficking. Now, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. According to the International Labor Organization, there are an estimated 40.3 million victims of human trafficking worldwide. Human trafficking occurs worldwide, and victims include all ages, genders, and nationalities. Human trafficking is a highly profitable crime and is an estimated $150 billion global industry. Now, what you should know. Human trafficking is a crime that affects people all around the world, including both developed and developing countries. Human trafficking is a broad term that encompasses sex trafficking, forced labor, and domestic servitude, which are all forms of slavery. Anyone can become a victim, and victims struggle to escape the abuse of the traffickers. Simply walking away and finding help is not always an option. In the general public, there are many myths and misconceptions about human trafficking and the victims affected by it. Let's discuss 3 of them. Myth number 1. Human trafficking only happens outside of the United States. This just simply is not true. Over 5,000 cases were reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline in 2018 alone. The most common type of trafficking in the U.S. is sex trafficking, and the majority of victims are women. Myth number 2. Human trafficking is only sex trafficking. Trafficking includes sex trafficking for sure, but it also includes forced labor and domestic servitude. Victims can be forced into working for farms, factories, construction sites, and for households as maids and nannies. Victims in forced labor produce many of the products that we consume on a daily basis and have been connected to production of items such as sugarcane, coffee, tobacco, bricks, garments, and gold. Now, resources for identifying products connected to trafficking can be found at www.dol.gov. Myth number 3. Only women and girls become victims of human trafficking. While women and girls are more likely to become victims, they are not the only victims of trafficking. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, many men and boys make up 29% of trafficking victims worldwide. Now, why should we care? Human trafficking is a global issue. It has been criminalized in 158 countries, but rates of prosecution remain low. Traffickers use force, coercion, threats, and violence to control their victims. This can include holding identification documents hostage, threatening a victim's family, and threats of retribution if victims do not comply. Human trafficking affects a large number of people across the globe, and rates of trafficking continue to rise. Human trafficking has become especially prevalent in areas of armed conflict where the law has less control. While a variety of government and non-government organizations work to combat human trafficking, rates still continue to rise. Now, how do we prosecute the traffickers? Prosecution of traffickers is exceptionally low compared to the number of victims. Rates of prosecution and conviction are increasing, but so are the rates of human trafficking. Conviction is disproportionately lower than the number of victims worldwide. But who is helping? A variety of organizations are working against human trafficking. This includes national governments, intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations. In the United States alone, the National Human Trafficking Hotline and the Department of Homeland Security are major players in the fight against trafficking. Some intergovernmental organizations include the United Nations, the World Bank, and the European Union. And non-governmental organizations include the Polaris Project and UNICEF, which focuses on child trafficking. Despite efforts of various organizations, human trafficking persists and rates of trafficking continue to rise. How do you recognize the signs of human trafficking? Many victims, unfortunately, are physically abused or otherwise mistreated. They may have bruising or scars, poor dental health, or a brand of some kind on their skin, and they may not be able to make eye contact when speaking with you. Individuals may also appear malnourished and have few personal possessions, including documents that help identify them. Another way to recognize a sign of human trafficking is if you see a young child working alone. According to data gathered by UNICEF, 25% of minors become child laborers in poor and underdeveloped countries. A child may give scripted responses when asked questions, and they may not even know what city they are in. Prevention is key. Learning how to identify victims and potential trafficking situations is the first and foremost step of preventing human trafficking. We must also be a wise consumer by supporting companies that don't use slave labor and pay their employees standard wages. We can also address vulnerabilities on a community level. If we encourage a community to interact, individuals within the community can feel that they have more power to help potential victims. And most importantly, providing protection to trafficking survivors. Often, trafficked people who don't make it to their destination due to political borders or otherwise are stopped get treated as migrants instead of victims and denied any sort of protection. Now, there are resources available for victims of human trafficking and a variety of ways to report suspected trafficking. There's the National Hotline for Human Trafficking, the Be Free text line, and the Department of Homeland Security Blue Campaign.